This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of November 3rd, 2025. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on X, formerly Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discuss a stunner, how Alaska takes more as a share of income from its middle and lower income Alaska families than California takes under its income tax from its billionaires. Second, we explain why the task force on education funding needs to address how they actually intend to fund the increased spending they want. And third, we examine the irony of Alaska's SNAP funding fiscal crisis, how many of the same legislators who are now outraged about the potential loss of funds themselves voted to take even more from the same recipients in the last budget. And now, let's join Michael.
Before we get into the deep end, let's talk about what I mentioned yesterday, because people almost lost their mind when I quoted you from the message you sent me this weekend when you were like, holy cow, spending my free hours going through all these tax information because he's fun at parties, and then discovered that Alaska's taxes actually taxes the middle and lower income more than California taxes their gazillionaires. Walk me through this, Brad. What's going on?
Well, Michael, as you say, fun at parties. And just to prove that this weekend, I started going through some tax data, mostly because I wanted to put an Alaska flat tax, what an Alaska flat tax would look like in context with other states that have flat taxes. There are now 14 states, 2 more on the way that have flat taxes. The Tax Foundation has talked about it as a revolution, flat tax revolution. And Alaska would fit if Alaska adopted a flat tax to cover its deficits as opposed to using PFD cuts. Alaska would fit right in. As I was doing the chart, I threw in the top 10, the marginal rates from the top 10 states that have progressive income taxes, just for some perspective. And then separately, I've been working on some calculations with respect to what the PFD cuts does by income bracket in the state, and all of a sudden it dawned on me what the result was. So if you've got the chart in front of you,
it's going to take a sec. I apologize. It'll take a sec, but it'll pop up in here.
So what I did was I charted the impact of using PFD cuts by income bracket on Alaskans by the low, middle, low quartiles, low, middle, upper middle, and high by income bracket, and compared the impact of those to the impact of those to the marginal tax rates, the highest marginal tax rates in the nation, the top 10 marginal state income tax rates. And what this chart shows, the flat tax is on the right, and I'll get to that at some point. But on the left, before the break, what this shows is the impact of PFD cuts by income bracket for 3 categories of income brackets in the red for Alaska. The first is the lowest 25%, the impact of PFD cuts as a share of income, what PFD cuts take as a share of income for the lowest 25%. The second over is the impact on the low 50%. So I combined the low 25% and the lower middle 25%. And then, just because I wanted to see what the result was, I did the lowest 75%. The impact of PFD cuts on the lowest 75%, and that's the third red bar from the left, and that shows the average impact of PFD cuts on lower middle, and upper middle income families as a share of income, as a percent of total income, using the latest IRS data for income. And then the blue bars next to that are the marginal rates, the highest rates, the rates that apply to the millionaires and the billionaires in each of the states that have, in the top 10 states that have progressive rates, the top marginal rates in the state rates in the nation. And as you can see, California is there, 13.3%, highest marginal rate in the nation. Hawaii, which I hadn't really focused on before, has the next highest marginal rate, 11%. New York has the next highest marginal rate, which a lot of people talk about, at 10.9%. And then it goes on down from there in the remaining 10. That is the marginal rate, the highest rate, the rate they charge their billionaires in each of those states. And as you can see, as a share of income, as a percent of income, those rates are dwarfed by the impact of PFD cuts on the lowest 25%, on the lowest 50%, and even on the lowest 75%, the low middle, lower middle, and upper middle income families. To put this another way, to put it in a way that I've been trying to phrase this in a way that will show the impact, Alaska is the California of regressive tax rates. It is not only the California of regressive tax rates. When you look at the lowest 25%, you could add California's marginal tax rate plus New York's marginal tax rate plus Hawaii's marginal tax rate, and it would still be less than the average marginal tax rate on the low 25%. You could add California and New York, and you get pretty close to still being higher with the average marginal tax rate on Alaska's lowest 50%. So when you think about, oh my gosh, you think about what people say about California and New York. Oh my gosh, those marginal tax rates, they're driving people out of the state. They're driving people from California to Texas, or from New York to Florida. Those marginal tax rates are horrible. They're having such a horrible effect on out migration. Well, look at what Alaska's tax rates are doing to our lowest 25%, our lowest 50%, and our lowest 75%. If you want an explanation, if you want to understand why Alaska has outmigration in its working class, working family, working age families, if you want to understand what's going on, just look at those marginal tax rates. Just like California, just like we say, California and New York and Hawaii has other things going on, but California and New York are driving their high income families out of the state. Look at what those marginal tax rates are doing to California's, or looking to Alaska's middle income families.
Can you remind us, Brad, what these are quartiles, not quintiles? So can you remind us what is the, give us the ballpark of what is the low, middle, lower, middle, what is the range there? We're talking about 25, 50, 75.
It's really interesting, Michael. I've got the sheet, and it'll be in the Friday column, the precise numbers. But even the average income in the bottom 75%, the average income among lowest, lower middle, and upper middle, the average income is less than $50,000. Alaska has a huge skew between the average income for middle income families, low and middle income families, and the upper 25%. It is a huge skew. I mean, there's this huge gap that goes on between the two. If you average in, if you average in the top 25%, that red bar would drop down to where you see the first red bar on the right-hand side, 4.9%. That's because the averaging impact of the income from the top 20% really brings the average down. But so if my memory is about 16,000, 17,500 maybe for the low 25%, maybe in the 25s, somewhere 26, 27, between 25 and 30 for the lower 50%, the average income for the lower 50%. But I'm pretty confident that I remember the number for the bottom 25%, or bottom 75%,
Right.
the lower and the combined lower and middle income classes is less than $50,000.
Now, this is an interesting comparison because, it's not necessarily proving anything except for our tax rate, this hidden tax rate through the PFD cut is highly skewed. Because again, we're comparing, billionaires to lower and middle income and, or millionaires or the wealthy, but it's indicative of what's going on in the state as far as that take, and how it's affecting the lowest 75% of income earners in the state. So that is an interesting take. No, there's not a whole lot of billionaires living in Alaska, but when you look at it and you realize that California is not even treating their marginal lowest 75% in the same way, you realize that this is a significant change for Alaska.
If I were to do the marginal tax rate on our millionaires, let's just pick millionaires. Let's not pick on billionaires. If I were to do the marginal tax rate for our millionaires in Alaska, and put it in the context of those blues bars, it would be 0.2%, 0.2%, compared to Alaska's 13.3%. So it just shows that it demonstrates the regressivity of the Alaska tax system of using PFD cuts to raise revenues. The Alaska's millionaires or even $100,000 heirs are paying minuscule average tax rates, marginal tax rates compared to those in the top 10 states, or indeed any state that has a progressive income tax. I mean, I could put all of them out there, and Alaska would still be the lowest. But what so while we're taxing our 100,000aires and our millionaires at a very low rate, we're taxing our middle and lower income Alaska families at an increasingly top rate.
Right.
And you can see how big that hit is by comparing it to the marginal rates that are in the other states.
And no, we're not talking about populations. This is a per capita this is about income, not about populations. Quickly here, 2 minutes. The flat tax, is that what's on the right here? This is the right hand side of the equation.
Right. So this shows the flat tax by state. There are 14 states that have adopted it. There are 2 more that are in process of adopting it, a healthy chunk. And it looks at the flat tax by what the flat tax rate is. And I'd have to blow this up to figure it out. I don't have. Oh, there we go. Idaho's the top at 5.7%. Idaho and Utah, both states that are in the western region and states that are have booming state economies, have higher flat tax rates than Alaska would if we covered our deficits through flat taxes as opposed to through PFD cuts. The other thing I looked at, some of these flat tax rates are misleading because the state has both a flat tax and a sales tax. And so the flat tax is lower than it would be if you were trying to recover all of their deficit through just the flat tax. So I looked at Alaska and said, okay, so what if we had a sales tax and a flat tax and we recovered half our revenue, half the deficit through the sales tax and half the revenue through the flat tax? What would Alaska's flat tax be? And that is comparable to many of the states who in this chart who also have sales taxes. And Alaska's flat tax rate at 2.4%, if we set it up that way, would be the lowest. Hang on a second. Incoming voice call from Lorraine Epperson. Would be the lowest flat tax rate in the nation. If we did it the same way some other states do. So a flat tax, I mean, people say well, we can't even afford a flat tax. Well, look at our regional competitors, Idaho and Utah. They have higher flat taxes, and our flat tax is about the same as several other states. And if we paired it with a sales tax that raised part of the revenue through a sales tax, our flat tax rate would be the lowest in the nation. So it's those who run around claiming, oh my God, we don't have enough of a tax base, we couldn't nearly raise enough through through income taxes or through other forms of revenue measures as opposed to PFD cuts? Yeah, we can. I mean, and we fit right in the nation in terms of where we end up with a flat tax rate.
Question: does the flat tax rate take into consideration income that's not taxed, such as the first $12,000 not being taxed? I don't know if it does or not, Brad.
No, a lot of states don't take it. A
I'm
lot of
sorry.
states. Am I there?
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of states don't have deductibles like that, so I didn't include a deductible like that. What David's talking about is the federal income tax. Not all states are based on the same basis as the federal income tax. They have different bases. So no, that takes into account all income. The Alaska flat tax takes into account all income,
Yeah.
and the 2.4% rate on the right could be the result not of pairing it with the sales tax, but of pairing it with raising revenues through reforming oil taxes. It could be paired with a lot of things that we improve POMV performance, PFD performance, or PFC, Permanent Fund Corporation performance. It could be paired with a lot of things, and we could bring that rate down. So it's just representative of what the rates would be under certain conditions.
And Jim asks, what tax system in Alaska, and you're talking about using PFD cuts is as a form of effective, it's a tax, effectively, it's a tax. And so that's what you're talking about here with this, is that it's a PFD cut.
There was an article. I mean, we should be past that point of arguing about whether PFDs are taxes. There was even an article in Must Read, a column in Must Read that talked about the PFD cuts as taxes. So yeah, I mean, that's what they are. That's what they've been throughout.
Wasn't it Matt Berman from ICER that basically said that, he said that this is effectively a tax, call it whatever you want, but it has the same effect as a tax. It's effectively a tax. So
yeah, it's like tariffs. I mean, at the national level, tariffs are called tariffs instead of taxes, but they're taxes. I mean, they are taxes on imports. And we just call them tariffs because they're a specialized kind of tax. PFD cuts are also a specialized kind of tax. They're still a tax. They're in the big umbrella of taxes. They divert revenue from private income over to the government, withhold and divert revenue over to the government. That's what a tax is, and that's what they are. So yeah, that's the system we're talking about.
It's interesting. This was again kind of a 10,000-foot view. David asked early on. He said, "Have you considered the benefits that the lowest 25% receive, like SNAP and free cell phones, Medicaid, etc.?" But I mean, this is the 10,000-foot view. It wasn't necessarily to dive down into the details, right?
Yeah, no, and I'm taxing them. I mean, to go back to his other question about whether I included a 12,000 deduction, I didn't. I tax the lower 25%. The PFD cuts. I mean, let's focus on this for a minute. PFD cuts tax the lowest 25%. They tax them at a huge marginal rate. So the tax system we use, the flat tax system we use, also taxes the lowest 20%, but it's a better tax for them. It's a lower tax for them. They save money. They have more income in their pockets by substituting a flat tax for PFD cuts. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm not a college graduate, but I mean, even I understand that the big red line, the 37%, that 4.9% is still much lower than 37%. Even I understand that, right? I mean, so yeah, if you were talking about a flat tax versus, this PFD tax on the marginal rate, yeah, it's pretty obvious that they would be better off with a flat tax at that point as well. It would be the upper incomes that would be screaming at that point.
Yeah,
because
but but the thing about a flat tax that I think is the killer argument for it is no one pays any more than anybody else. Yes, proportionally. The Alaska as a share of income. The Alaska upper incomes would pay a bit more in terms of the share of their income using a flat tax as opposed to PFD cuts, but they wouldn't pay any more than anybody else as a share of income. Everybody would have the same skin in the game in terms of government costs. And as we've talked about before, I think that would motivate the upper incomes who now have no incentive, no financial incentive to push back on spending. It would motivate the upper incomes to start pushing back on spending.
Here's Michael Dukes.
Well, we knew that they were going to do it. We knew as soon as we saw the makeup of the education task force, it was confirmed when we saw the first tranche of guest speakers that they were going to have at the Education Task Force. And lo and behold, look at what they're talking about already. They're already talking about how they need to increase the funding. Brad, this is all about the Education Task Force and how they're looking for more. The funding is the answer. Funding is the answer. What we just need more money. Oh, we could kill all these other programs too. By the way, the Alaska Reads thing, which is actually showing progress, we should, but the money, we need more money. We knew it was coming, and here it is.
Well, yeah, we had a broad range of testifiers at last week's second meeting of the Education Task Force, the bicameral Education Task Force, and it was interesting. It was from stem to stern, basically, people talking about needing more money. Very, very few ideas on how to raise the additional money that's needed. AML. I want to dive deeper into this, exactly what they're proposing. But AML,
the Alaska Municipal League. So just so
right,
people know what AML is,
right? The Alaska Municipal League, thank you, had one proposal that was interesting because it said, let's take off the cap on local contribution. Let's allow local communities to contribute more toward education. If the local communities want more spending in their school system, let's allow them to contribute more. And that would have some ramifications at the state level, because it would undo the reason we have limitations on local spending is to fit within federal guidelines for a funding source that brings about $150 million a year, if I recall correctly, from the federal government to the state government. And if we took off the spending cap and allowed local governments to spend more if they wanted to on their school districts, it would increase the disparity between the top spending districts and the lower spending districts, the consequence of which we would no longer qualify for that federal funding. And so it would have the impact of taking that revenue source out of the system at the state level, although that revenue would still go to the local districts that qualify for it. So it wouldn't take it out of the state, it would just take it out of the state level. But AML was saying, let's undo that cap. And for those districts who want to spend more, let them spend more. And for those districts who don't want to spend more, that's okay as well. That was really the only comment that was made during the entire presentation about funding sources. The rest of it was all about spend more, spend more, spend more, spend more, spend more. And I think Representative Ruffridge did a service during the hearing when he said this, and I'll quote from the Anchorage Daily News comment on what Ruffridge said. Both Ruffridge and Senator Mike Cronk, a Tok Republican also serving on the committee, have said that Education Task Force discussion should be shaped by the state's fiscal situation. This is what Ruffridge said. I think we all actually have a necessity to answer the question, what would be the way that you personally, those testifying in favor of increased spending, what would be the way that you personally, or people that you talk to, people in your circles, would choose to fund these additional elements? That is, who pays? How are we going to pay for the additional spending these people are talking about? Just saying, as many testifiers did, the legislature will figure that out. No, we won't, Ruffridge said. We've had that in front of us for a long time. This is exactly the same, the flip side of all of the testimony that's gone on over the last decade about spending cuts. Every time that somebody would get up in front of the legislature and say, the solution to all of this problem is spending cuts, just cut spending. When they were asked what spending they would cut, the response has been, oh, the legislature will figure that out. You just need to cut spending. It's not our problem where you cut spending. You need to figure that out. And the legislature never has. They've just kept spending. And now we've got the flip side of that. And fortunately, Representative Ruffridge, at least thus far, is bringing it out. We've got the flip side of that by people in the education committee saying, we need to spend more, we need to spend more, we need to spend more. And no one saying where the heck the additional dollars are supposed to come from, or how the legislature is supposed to raise the additional dollars. And Representative Ruffridge is sort of pushing back in the same way that those did during the spending cut years by saying, where would you make where would you raise the revenue? This hearing is sort of in fantasy land if they don't, if the testifiers and the representatives, the legislators on the panel, if they don't confront the where's the funding going to come from for this additional spending, if they don't address that additional issue. Because everybody can say, oh, we need to spend more in this area. 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 If they don't have the responsibility of coming forward with where that revenue is supposed to come from, who we're going to affect, who's going to be hit by that increased spending, who's going to fund the increased spending. If they don't have to confront that, there's no ceiling, there's no pushback, there's no counterbalance to we need to spend more, we need to spend more. If you force testifiers to come in and say we need to spend more on X, and I think we should pay for it by progressive income tax, or we should pay for it by deeper PFD cuts, or we should pay for it by a flat tax, then you're going to have some constraints on the conversation, because people are going to say, oh, I don't want to pay more for that. It's nice in the absence of having to come up with the funding source. It's nice in the absence of that to say, oh, we need to have retirement, a defined benefit retirement. We need to have more in the classrooms. We need to have higher teacher salaries. We need to cut down on classroom size, so we need more teachers overall. It's all nice to say that if you don't have to confront the constraint of where the heck the money's going to come from. But if you have to confront that constraint, if you have to say, as those who advocated spending cuts did in the last decade, if you have to say, where is it going to come from? Where are their spending cuts going to come from, or where's the additional revenues going to come from? If you have to confront that, then you have a balance, at least, between you have a constraint on the increased spending that you're talking about, and people start pushing back on that increased spending. So I think he was alone in pushing back. Ruffridge was alone in that pushback out of the what are there, 8 panel members or so. He was alone in that pushback, but at least he was making the pushback on that issue, and that's an issue I think that I hope he keeps articulating. Senator Cronk articulates along with him, the only 2 Republicans on the committee, on the task force. I hope they keep pushing back on that.
Right.
And I hope it's a issue that starts resonating around the state as people start talking about what the recommendations are.
But again, Brad, this was not surprising. Again, looking at the makeup and understanding that this is 100%, as Kevin said, 100% kabuki theater. That they knew that they basically had an outcome that they already wanted, and they're looking for political cover for that kabuki theater as they go through, and that's where we're at right now. That the only answer is more money, but again, there is no more money. How do we do that? We had they had to rob an account to pay for this SNAP thing, which we're going to talk about in the next segment. They had to rob money out of another account because they just don't have, they didn't have $10 million laying around out of a state that's got a $6 billion budget. They didn't have $10 million just laying around to try and offset this emergency here. And so, where are they going to come up with, another $300-400 million for forever per year forever to try, if they increase, that's just assuming they increase the BSA by another 1,000, try and reach that $1,800 mark that they were looking at. This is crazy. That this is the answer.
I want people. So the assumption is they'll come up. They'll do it through PFD cuts, right? There's still 650 plus or minus million out there in PFD. So the assumption is they'll do it through. I want people to have to confront that. I want testifiers to have to say that we will pay for it through additional PFD cuts. We will pay for it through taking additional money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. Notwithstanding the fact everybody on the task force is in the top 20%, notwithstanding a lot of those pushing for increased spending are in the top 20%, we will pay for it by taking money out of the pockets of increased amounts of money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. I want them at least to have to say that.
Right.
I do give credit to AML, and again, the Alaska Municipal League. I need to dig into this deeper about exactly what they were saying, but I do give credit to them for raising the possibility that the local government would have to would pony up additional money if they want additional spending in their schools. As I said in a previous column, and we talked about previous landmine column, and as we talked about in a previous segment on the show, I think we have a huge disconnect in Alaska. We have the nation's lowest local contribution to the school systems. The state funds a huge the biggest chunk of the school systems, whereas in the rest of the nation it's like 40% local, 40% state, 20% national, federal. In Alaska, it's like 80% state and a minor share coming from the local. And as a consequence, you have the local school districts who are making the decisions about teacher contracts and making the decisions about striving for class size and all that sort of stuff. They're not paying for it. They're paying a very small share of the total cost. So I like AML's proposal. I mean, I think there's merit to AML's proposal when you get to the who pays question of saying, okay, you want more spending in school district, you pay for it locally. I think there's merit. I think there's merit in that.
And I want to dissect that a little bit during the break here, because again, this is part of the reason we do that, and the reason that they limit it is because there's federal funding attached to it, and the federal funding has conditions. We could just stop taking the funding, in which case we could do whatever we wanted. But the thing is, it's a significant amount of money. So we'll talk about that here in the break. But we've got number 3 coming up, which is a doozy. We're going to talk a little bit about the SNAP benefits and more. But again, nothing surprising. Final thoughts here on the education task force and their points, Brad.
Well, nothing surprising in terms of pushing for increased spending. A little bit of a pleasant surprise out of what AML had to say, and a pleasant surprise out of what Representative Ruffridge had to say in terms of pushing back on those calls for increased spending without talking about where the money's supposed to come from. But generally speaking, no surprises.
Right. Who pays, right? That's the biggest question amongst this whole thing, is who pays, and only a handful of people in the whole legislature seem to be asking that consistently. So this was my question earlier on the last year when we were starting to talk about this, and this concept of increasing local contributions came up, because some people are paying up to the cap already, and it's an artificial cap that's been brought on by this federal money, which is supposed to fix inequity by basically saying people who live in their communities can't spend more on their schools if it outpaces smaller, less prosperous communities, I guess I should say, in their thing. And there's that equity money that comes out of that. But you're saying that wouldn't necessarily matter, because the money would then go directly to those communities versus going through the state's hands. I didn't hear that part of it. So
yeah. So the money is coming on behalf of rural districts that have substantial federal presence, substantial federal ownership of lands in their districts, or other substantial federal presence, perhaps. And so it's coming as a result of the federal money in lieu of taxes, in lieu of property taxes that might otherwise be paid on the federal lands. The federal government is contributing money on behalf of those districts. It's a little artificial, because the money comes to the state if the state abides by the terms and conditions of that money, which is that there not be a greater disparity than X between the amount of funding going to those districts that are not funding as much as other districts are. If the disparity is X. And so the state has fought hard to keep that source of money coming to it. $160 million is my recollection of it. States fought hard because it reduces what this otherwise is coming out of the state coffers for the BSA. If the state breached the disparity, if the state no longer enforced those limits that are required by the federal funding, attached to the federal funding, if the state breached those limits and no longer had limits on the disparity, the funds would still come. They would just go to those districts instead of being spread statewide, as happens now through state funding. They just come directly to those districts as they earn it, as those districts are entitled to it, calculated on the basis of what federal lands, the sheriff's federal lands in their districts are. So it would come into the state. It would just be targeted to those districts. And the concern by the state is, the reason this gets to be a state issue is the concern by the state is, oh, we'd have to come up with the difference then to fund the full BSA. I mean, basically what the state says is, here's the BSA, here's what the federal government is paying, and so we only have to take out of state funds this. If you remove the federal funds, if the federal funds go to those districts, then the state would have to pay the full BSA. One response is, well, you could lower the BSA in that event down to what you're otherwise paying, with the state funds. But that's what's going on, and I think that works. Frankly, I'm in favor of that. In favor of doing away with the disparity test and increasing the burden, because it would increase the burden on the local school districts to pay their own way. I mean, if they want great schools, if they want low number of students per class, if they want to pay teachers, the top dollar in the nation, then have at it. But fund it from your sources. I mean, do that balance, because you're the one deciding what to pay the teachers.
Right.
Do that balance inside your own sources.
Yeah. If you want to keep these schools open, right, these schools that are at 50% capacity, and that's what we're seeing, all the picketing and the protesting and the signs and everything, keep our school open. Well, great. Well, now you're going to have to pay for it through your property taxes or whatever else if you want to keep doing that. And there's an actual cost. It's not just go to Uncle Sugar and ask them for more money. It's now, oh, we've got to pay for it. And that may change the equation.
Yeah. I mean, because one of the greatest lobbyists, one of the most powerful sets of lobbyists that comes down to Juneau for increased school funding is the local school boards, right? I mean, we need more for Johnny's in our district, for Johnny's in your district. We need more for them, and we can't do it. So, the state's the one that funds it. So you need to appropriate more for us. If we shifted an increasing share, not the total burden, but shifted an increasing share, a material share of the burden to the local districts to pay for that, then, oh my gosh, if we pay teachers more, we're going to have to pay for it. We're going to have to, convince our constituents that are electing us to the school board. We're going to have to convince them that we did the right thing by paying our teachers more. And the constraints on spending aren't any longer as much at the state level, where we found there's no constraints. The constraints aren't as much as the state level as they start showing up in the local level. So I think AML's proposal, they may not intend it this way, but I think AML's proposal of doing away with the state having the contribution in aid, the federal contribution in aid, I think the AML proposal to do away with the state having it has merit.
Okay, continuing on, Brad Keithley is our guest. The weekly top three. We're already at number 3. How we get here so quickly? Number 3 for Brad is the irony of Alaska's SNAP funding crisis. Boy, irony? Tell me it ain't so, Brad. Tell me there's no irony when we're dealing with. Tell me that. That's ironic that there's never any irony with the Alaska legislature.
Over the last week, as the SNAP crisis has developed, and the SNAP crisis for supplemental nutrition, since we're spelling out acronyms, supplemental nutritional assistance program. See, I actually know what it is. Since we're food stamps. Oh, there you go. Cut to the chase. Since we're talking about, as the SNAP crisis has been developing over the past week, and the crisis is that the federal government, since it shut down, the claim by the Trump administration has been they weren't going to fund the SNAP programs after the 1st of November, that they'd run out of funds. And as a consequence, everybody was running around like chickens with their head cut off, concern about what would happen if the SNAP benefits were cut off. Over the course of the last week, I've just been chuckling as I've seen various legislators, just up in arms about the SNAP crisis and about oh my God, what are we going to do, and how do we ever resolve this problem? I've been chuckling because of this. It's the same legislators who are running around being concerned about it as who voted for PFD cuts.
Yeah,
voted in the budget for PFD cuts.
Oh yeah,
and so since I'm not fun at parties because I spend all my time fiddling with the numbers, I went and started doing some numbers. So we have, according to the calculations these legislators are using, we have 66,000 people in Alaska, individuals in Alaska who are suddenly without any form of support and relief because the
Right.
federal government is cutting SNAP.
Right.
So I took that times the amount of the PFD cut this year, what they would have received in October had we complied with the statutory PFD. Those same 66,000 or most, there may be a few who don't qualify for PFDs, but those same 66,000 who were concerned about the loss of SNAP benefits. And did that at times the PFD cut, which was $2,675 plus or minus $2,675 per PFD. If we had paid out the statutory PFD to those 66,000 people, that would have been $175 million. $175 million that would have hit their banking accounts or their pockets or however the heck they receive it. It would have been $175 million that hit that 66,000 people. The whole SNAP crisis is about $27 million per month.
Right.
And it's not going to be for a full year because eventually the federal government will open. Eventually, SNAP will get funded at the federal level. So it's $27 million a month for however many months this crisis drags on. That's the shortfall in what everybody's concerned about, the SNAP beneficiaries not receiving. They're not receiving $27 million. If we had paid out the PFD to those same 66,000 people in October, they would have $175 million in their pocket. More than enough to offset the loss of SNAP benefits. What's going on here is control. I mean, so the legislature decided, those who are now running around concerned about SNAP benefits, the legislature decided in its infinite wisdom that it wouldn't put $175 million in those people's pockets. The legislature would hold on to that $175 million, and they would decide what programs, what benefits, what places that money would be spent. Wouldn't put it in the hands of the people. The legislature would decide that $175 million, counting on SNAP benefits, I suppose, to help deal with the fact they've taken $175 million out of those people's pockets, counting on SNAP benefits to sort of fill in the gap that would be created in their food security. What happened when SNAP benefits got cut is all of a sudden this whole charade that the legislature goes through of taking money out of people's pockets and saying we're doing it for your own good got exposed, because rather than the SNAP benefits showing up, which those legislators rely on when they take $175 million out of their pockets, rather than the SNAP benefits showing up, all of a sudden they didn't show up, and so all of a sudden the $175 million they took out of their pockets makes a difference. People are now going to go hungry because the legislature, not as much the SNAP benefits, but because the legislature took $175 million out of those same people's pockets in October. That's what's really going on. The legislature took that $175 million, relying on the federal government to contribute $27 million a month. The legislature took $175 million out of their pockets. And all of a sudden, the whole thing got blown up. The whole jerry-rigged house of cards got blown up when the federal government said, "Oh, we're not going to contribute that $27 million." So instead of the legislature saying, "Oops, we shouldn't have done that. We should go back and make sure they get those people get the money that is owed them under the statute, under the PFD statute." Instead of doing that, the legislature all of a sudden said, "Oh, wait, we got to come up with $27 more million from the state government to fill in that hole." It's just, I mean, the irony of what's going on here, or the hypocrisy, or whatever the heck word anybody wants to apply to this, what's going on here is just stupefying. I mean, we got a legislature who is actively taking money specified by statute to be distributed to these people, $175 million to go to these people, actively taking money out of their pockets, diverting it elsewhere.
Right.
and then all of a sudden going crazy when the federal government doesn't come up with $27 million on a monthly basis for its share of food stamps. Oh my gosh, man, it's a crisis. Huge. What about the $175 million? If 27 million, if taking $27 million out of their pockets is a crisis, what about the $175 million the legislature, you legislators who are complaining about this, all of a sudden concerned about SNAP? What about the $175 million you took out of their pockets? Isn't that an even bigger crisis?
Right.
But
well,
no.
and I went at this from the other direction. You went at it from the top down. I went at it from the bottom up, and I said, 66,000 people, $27 million. Okay, so what is that? It's $409 per person, essentially, of the 66,000. So if they had gotten their full PFD, they would have essentially a backup of 10 months worth of food that they could have purchased for themselves. 10 months worth of food. But the legislature said, no, you can't have $1,500. You can only have $1,000. You can't have the $2,000. You can't have the $2,500. You can't have the $3,700 that you would have gotten. We needed that to spend on X. And like you said, now all of a sudden it's a crisis because, well, we spent the money on something else, which we thought was more important. And it turns out it's not more important than people eating. Surprise. It's not more important than people eating. It's a simple $409 a month that they could have had in the bank and be ready to go to pay for their family's food, but they just couldn't do it.
It sort of reveals something else, right? It reveals that those legislators who vote for PFD cuts don't trust, don't value, aren't confident that the recipients are going to spend the money in a way that benefits the recipients, I guess. That somehow, we know better. The legislature knows better how to spend your $2,700 or $2,675. The legislature knows better how to spend that than you do, and we know better how to spend it on your behalf than you do. And then it gets, something like this happens, and it's revealed that, oh my gosh, they would have had more than enough to cover their food. There's an interesting study that I'll go back to at some point and do a deeper dive on, but there's a study that looked at how those in the lower income brackets actually, what they actually do with PFDs. And turns out that on the whole, they save them. And then they allocate them out over the year, either to pay credit cards or to pay rent or to do this or pay for food or this, that, or the other thing. It's not, they don't blow them on one-time expenses. The people who blow them on one-time expenses are largely those in the upper income brackets who don't need the money anyway. And so what do we do with this? We'll go spend it on a vacation, or we'll go spend it on something else. Those in the lower income brackets, the ones the legislature isn't trusting, the ones the legislature says you have to do it through food stamps, you can only get your money through food stamps, those people are actually saving the money and would have had that money in their savings accounts to be able to pay for food.
StreamYard crashed. I still had internet, but StreamYard crashed out. But how ironic, Brad, I was just saying before I got so rudely interrupted that, how ironic that these are the people we know how to spend your money until we don't, but then trust us for more. This is that's it. That's the whole thing there, right?
I mean, that's why the PFD is so important. It is Alaskans individual share of their commonly held wealth. It is their dividend from their commonly held wealth. They ought to be trusted to know how to spend it. And if you've got a few bad apples, like everybody wants to, use the example of the snow machines or whatever the heck, people that one-time spending that people do, that they use as the example of why you can't trust these people. If you got a few people who do that, okay, that's fine. But what you're doing is you're punishing the remainder, the ones who go out and save that money and use that money and spread it out over the year and use it for basic necessities and use it to have a cushion if something happens like SNAP is cut off. What you're doing is you're punishing those people by taking their money away. And the whole SNAP debacle just exposes that for what it is. We know better how to spend your money up until, some government program that we're depending upon goes away. And then turns out we didn't know how to better spend your money.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, this is the whole planned economy, planned this, planned that. And it turns out that bureaucracies and politicians don't know better than the average person or the free market in how to make these things work the best. And that's part of the problem, 100% for sure. And there's, like you said, it's hypocrisy. It's a combination of it's irony, it's it's irony, it's hypocrisy and irony boiled together into an utter stew of badness. So it's crazy. All right, Brad. Well, everybody wants to know what Brad's doing. Where are you at? What are you doing? What are you listening to? Where are you going?
It's music. I'm in Seattle. I'm going to a concert tonight. It's a double header of a Scottish band that I love and a U.S. Irish music band that I love at the Triple Door. Some will know the venue in Seattle. And so I'm in Seattle following the music to go to a concert.
The Pied Piper of music draws Brad all over the world. And what are you going to do? It's the only thing that he is fun at parties, contrary to our commentary here on the program. It's just the musical parties that he likes to go to.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
That's what it is. He doesn't like those big cocktail parties with all the politicians. He'd rather go to a music festival. And I can't say I blame him.
They certainly don't like me at those cocktail parties.
No, they do not.
Because I asked them questions. Oops, no, we don't want to answer that question.
No, yeah, we'd like to ask some questions, Brad. And I'd love to see you on the other side of the microphone in front of some of these Senate committees and House committees, because how do they answer the questions? The problem is that they can't actually answer the questions and articulate an answer. And that's the hypocrisy you're pointing out here. And I think it's great. So it's good to have you on. Anyway, thanks for covering for me for the minute there that I was going.
I didn't do anything.
I'm like, oh, well, Brad's got it. Don't worry. It looks like Brad's still on. It'll be fine. Brad's there. I don't know.
Brad was saying, oh, Michael's gone. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. Well, just Phil. You've done the radio long enough. You know what to do. So, all right. Well, Brad, thank you. Thank you for coming on board, my friend. I hope you enjoy your musical interlude, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the Weekly Top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the Weekly Top 3.